guys, it's the moment that it seems like a lot of you have been waiting for. We are going to get in depth with 4-links on a 4-wheel drive. Specifically talking 4-link here because I want to use my truck to illustrate everything. That way you guys can see it really plain and simple. All the concept still applies with the leaf spring and the ladder bar, but by the end of this video, I think you'll understand why 4-link is really the only way to go if you're gonna cut your truck up and do any sort of modifications beyond leaf springs. So, the first thing that we need to know, there's actually 4 things that we need to know before you ever go back there and set a 4-link bar. You need to know the overall weight of the truck. And when I say the overall weight, I mean sitting on the starting line, race ready, you in it, full of fuel, every fluid. Don't take everything into consideration and try not to forget anything because that weight is pretty important. Along with that weight, we need to know the weight bias. With the weight bias, we need to know the overall wheelbase of the truck. The way that you would measure wheelbase would be from center of the rear axle to center of the front axle. And then the last piece of the third piece of information we need to know is we need to know where the neutral balance point is. And I will go into that here in a minute. And then the last piece of information that we need to know is we need to know the starting line ratio. So I'm actually going to start with starting line ratio. So this particular truck here, you can go on WallaceRacingCalculator.com. I'll throw a picture of what my starting line ratio is up in the video here in a second. I have a 210 first gear ratio in the transmission. I have a 354 final gear ratio in the rear end. I have a 29.5 inch tall tire. And that information is what you'll use to punch in the calculator, and it will give you this fictitious number, essentially. The particular number on this right here is 7.43. What does that mean? Well, it really doesn't mean anything, but it's a comparison. So, for example, if this truck had a factory first gear ratio in the transmission, a 245, that would change, would change the starting line ratio to a 840 something. So it would actually move it almost an entire point the other way. So it would go from 743 to 843, let's call it. And so what that number means in either direction is essentially how much torque you are applying to the rear tire when you let go of the trans brake on the starting line. So if you look on their racing calculator, it'll say ideal starting line ratios are between 9 to 11, and don't pay attention to that because that is not true. For example, a car that runs in the 4-second range, you know, say a typical drag race car that runs 450s to 480s, their starting line ratio is going to start with a 6. It's going to be something in the 6s. Anything that works for a race car does not work on a 4-wheel drive diesel truck, pretty much. Like, if you go by that, you'll go pretty far with that because everything is just totally different with that. From my experience, the best starting line ratio to start with is if it starts with the number 7, you're good. Now, it's going to be hard for you to get it there if you have a standard first gear transmission, you have say a 354 gear truck, and you're on a 28 inch tall tire, your starting line ratio is probably going to be a 9 something. So when you're picking tires and say you're building a truck where you have the ability to pick what rear gear you want, I would try to make sure that you factor the starting line ratio into all of that and shoot for something in the 7s. If you have a 3rd gen with a 342 gear truck, you can get a pretty good starting line ratio with that if you run a 30 inch tall tire. And this number is directly related to the weight of the vehicle. So let's say this truck weighs 47.59, just fake number, let's say. And you have a truck that weighs 5,500 pounds. So say your truck is a solid 800 pounds heavier than this one. You can get away with a little bit worse starting line ratio than I can. So that would be closer to an 8 or closer to a 9 number. And that is because your truck's heavier, so it's going to take more force to drive the truck out, and it's going to be harder to upset the chassis and upset the tire with a lot of snap on the starting line ratio. Say in JP's truck, that is an undisclosed weight that I am not allowed to give out. Let's just say it's quite a bit lighter than this truck, under 4,000 pounds. The starting line ratio is even more critical on that truck because it is lighter. It is a lot easier to upset the tire. Now, this all ties back into the weight and the weight bias. The weight bias of your vehicle matters on this too. On JP's truck, the weight bias is really, really bad. It is around 75-25. So it's only 25% of the weight is on the rear tire. If you get after that with a bunch of starting line ratio, you know, something in the 8-9s, you're asking a whole lot of that chassis. It is really snapping that thing, and it doesn't have enough natural weight on the tire, you know, before the weight transfer. And it makes it really easy to upset the tire and throw it into spin really quickly. So the weight of your vehicle totally matters. And if you have something that's, say, 6,500 pounds, say you've got a full weight third gen, something in the high 8s would be totally fine. You could get away with it. Say if you had a 342 gear truck, you could run a 28-inch tall tire if you wanted to. If you had a 373 gear truck, I would try to get nothing shorter than a 30. And it, you know, depends on how much horsepower you have, of course, too, because if you're making not much horsepower, this stuff isn't going to matter as much. But when we get into making, you know, 12, 15, 1,800, 2,000 horsepower, the more the starting line ratio matters. So we need to know starting line ratio. This truck, like I said, 7.4 is my starting line ratio. The wheelbase of this truck is 131 inches. Now, let's talk about neutral balance point. So, this little piece of tape here that I can't get this thing to stay stuck because of the wax on this thing, that is my neutral balance point. The way that we find neutral balance is, the general rule of thumb is camshaft center line of your engine gives you the height measurement. And then to get the distance of where it is, where it lands in the chassis measurement, the easiest way to do it, if you're not a super mathematician with a calculator, is you can actually put this thing on jack stands, take 2 jack stands and move it around on the frame until it tries to basically balance itself. Now remember, you have to be in it. It has to be race weight, ready to go down the racetrack when you do this. But you can find the neutral balance point with just a pair of jack stands and some time. The neutral balance point on my truck is about right where I put that orange piece of tape. That's really, really close. This is going to matter for where we set bar angle with the 4-link and all that good stuff here momentarily. So I guess actually now we can jump right into 4-link stuff. So the first thing that we need to discuss when you're going to set up your rear 4-link bars is housing spread. Now what housing spread is the distance between the 2 4-link bars at the rear end housing, the spread between those 2 points. On a 4-wheel drive diesel truck that doesn't have the greatest starting line ratios, you want to put that housing spread as close together as you can possibly get it while still being able to put the instant center where you want it. On my particular truck, the closest I could get it was the second hole from the top at the top bar, and on the bottom bar it would be the second hole from all the way to the center. So I've got the spread not all the way as close to together as it could be, but about as close as I can get it with still making my instant center where I want it. Now the reason that is because the more spread you have on the rear end housing, the more leverage you have on the rear end housing. So if your starting line ratio is not that great and you make a bunch of torque like we do, and you have a really wide spread back there, it's going to make the rear end, it's going to make it very snappy. It's going to try to apply a lot of torque really fast to the tire. And back to what I said before, we are basically, every component of the four-link is a tool to make the tire do what you want the tire to do. So I like to keep the spread as narrow as possible, so that way it does not snap the tire as much. And what this will also do is this will allow it to apply more power, or I should say more torque, to the rear end down track. The more snap you have on the starting line, the less it will carry that out through the duration of the run. It'll put a lot of force down on the tire early, and then it'll take a lot of force off of the tire as you go down the run. So try to start with your four-link bars in the rear as close together as possible on the rear spread. Okay, so these orange pieces of tape here, they illustrate a couple different things. The line that goes from the top of the front tire to the bottom of the rear tire is your anti-squat line. Like we talked about in the last video, if your instant center, which is the point in which your four-link bars intersect, if that imaginary line where they intersect is above the anti-squat line, naturally the chassis will try to separate. If they're below the anti-squat line, naturally the chassis will try to squat. And then your center of gravity, your neutral balance point, and your height of your gravity, center of gravity over there, is going to have to do with where you put the instant center. So really easy rule of thumb on a four-wheel drive place to start with is somewhere about 50% of the wheelbase is what you want the length of your instant center to be. My wheelbase, like I said, is 131 inches. The instant center length on mine is 60 inches. And you're measuring that from the center of the rear axle to where the imaginary lines intersect. Now, to get these imaginary numbers, there's a couple different ways you can do it. If you have a line graph calculator, you can do that. If you're a mathematician like that, you can actually, if you want to do it super old school, you could draw all this out on a piece of grid paper, and every one of the grids could be, you know, an inch. If you have a real big piece of grid paper, and you could lay all these measurements out that way. You can lay it out with tape, like I have here. And this was mainly so that way I could really illustrate it for you guys so you understand what's going on. But the best way to do this, and the most accurate way, would be to get a software program like Jerry Bickle or Tim McCamus, and you'll take measurements of all of your four-link bracket bolt hole positions, all of the rear end bolt hole positions, the wheelbase, all, etc., everything I've been talking about, and you'll put it in the calculator, and that calculator will give you all of the possible instant center locations. So that's probably the best, most accurate way to do it. But if you don't have that program and you want to do it yourself, you can do it with tape or some grid paper, graphing calculator, stuff like that. So mine is 60 inches, which is a little shy of 50% because of where it lands on the anti-squat line. This is kind of what I talked about in the last picture, or the last video, where you kind of have to go big picture with all of this stuff. And you have to think about every effect having an adverse effect. So where, in my opinion, where you want to put the instant center as far as height goes in relation to the anti-squat line is you always want to stay above the anti-squat line. This could be debated, but I don't think so. A four-wheel drive, you're never going to get it to separate. I don't care what crazy bar angle you put in this thing, how high you get the instant center above the anti-squat line, how short you get it. The front wheels moving forward and the inertia that is creating is causing weight transfer in a way in which it's just not found in a two-wheel drive car and can't be replicated in a two-wheel drive. So I don't look at the anti-squat line as separate and squat when it comes to a four-wheel drive. I'm mainly using it as a reference to how hard it's going to hit the shock and how hard it's going to hit the tire. The if I was to set my instant center up below the anti-squat line, it is really gonna scoop a lot of the weight of this truck. The further down it is, you know, imagine a seesaw, and it's really scooping the weight of this truck, and it's really making the rear shocks work really hard, which is going to drive the tire down really hard, which could upset your tire. So I want to stay relatively close to the anti-squat line while keeping as long of an instant center as possible and keeping it underneath of the center of gravity. I want it under the center of gravity because, back to that scooping deal, I want it to be able to scoop the weight of the vehicle up to apply the weight to the rear. The weight bias on these four-wheel drive trucks are bad. So we need to be able to use the really bad weight that we have and put it on the rear tire, but we have to be able to do it in a way in which it doesn't do it too quickly and upset the tire. So the longer your instant center is, it's going to slow all of that down on the starting line. It's going to slow down how quickly it scoops the weight of this vehicle up in the front and applies it to the rear tire, giving the shocks their chance to work, giving the tire the way that it needs to be loaded properly to drive through the 60 foot and on down the racetrack. So I've got my instant center height about 2 inches above the anti-squat line. And this is at ride height with the chassis not loaded, sitting on the starting line. Now this is something that you really have to factor into this, is when you let go of the foot brake or you let go of the trans brake and this thing starts to weight transfer, you have to think, what does that do to your instant center? Where does it put it in relation to the anti-squat line? Well, like I said, these trucks are going to squat. So when it does squat, the chassis is going to come down. It's going to lower your instant center. And while it's lowering it, it's also going to kind of move it out. So when it moves it forward, when you're really close to anti-squat line, when you're really close to being 0 on the anti-squat, right on the line, and the chassis squats and gets loaded, you're actually going to drop the instant center below the anti-squat line, which is going to promote more squat, which is going to hit the tire harder, but at the same time, it's going to move it more forward. So it's going to keep the tire loaded harder for longer. That might be exactly what your truck wants, or that might be the exact opposite of what your truck wants. You could have the instant center set up exactly where it needs to be at ride height, but when you let go of the trans brake and it snaps the chassis and it drops it below the anti-squat, it might be enough to upset it. So you could be that close with your 4-link, but be off because you're not considering what it does when the chassis actually squats down. So what you need to do, so that way you know this measurement, is you need to figure out roughly how much your chassis is going to squat. I kind of know where mine is going to squat because I have enough experience with it. I know how I have the shock set up. If you don't know and you're doing this for the first time, it's going to be a little bit of trial and error. That's why it's back to there's no magic 4-link, back to why you have to put in some work with this stuff. You might have to just set it up the way it is and go to the racetrack and see what it does. But what you can do at the shop with no prior knowledge is you can kind of guess where it's going to squat. You never want to bottom your shock out, and I don't want to get into shocks in this video because it'll get too long-winded, but you don't want to bottom a shock out, so you never want it to go more than about 1 inches of shaft showing. So basically using most of the travel of the shock. So simple thing you could do is take the springs off the truck or run them all the way down, and you can basically make the ride height of the truck in the rear like it's squatted, like it will be when it's driving through the 60 foot. You can even extend the front up a little bit if you really want to get accurate with it, because your front's going to separate while this happens, which is going to change the position of your 4-link brackets on the chassis. And If you do that, then you'll be able to take an accurate measurement of where the anti-squat, the instant center ends up on the anti-squat line when the chassis is loaded. If you get the instant center too high above the anti-squat line, and say you get it above the center of gravity, well, what that's going to do is that is going to go back to making the chassis really snappy. And the reason that is because you lose that long scoop effect, and you're really just trying to pick up, say if you put the instant center like right here. Well, the problem is if this is above the center of gravity and it's this high above the anti-squat line, it's going to just be using the back of the truck to set the tire. So it's going to snap the tire down really hard, and it's going to piss the tire off, it's going to throw the tire up, and then there's no mechanical load for the down track part of it, and it's just going to spin the tire. So in my opinion, the best place to start, below the center of gravity, above the anti-squat line, as long as you can get it. I think if you start there, you'll have pretty good success right out of the box. So we're going to conclude this portion of the suspension talk. This was a lot to take in. I would say you guys might even have to watch this a couple times. Shocks is a whole lengthy video in itself, so I don't want to talk about shocks yet, but shocks are very crucial, and we will be getting to that next. As well as the different styles of tires, the different compounds, the different air pressure. Tires are going to be a video all on themselves as well. There's a lot of information to cover with tires. All of this information is all pulled up into one, but if we take it in little bites like this, I think it'll be a lot better for you guys to understand, and I think you guys have more success with this information. There's just no information like this out there, man, and I think the guys that know this stuff are safeguarding the information, and I get it because all of this information you can't just go out and find. You have to go to the track and earn it. It costs money. It takes time away from your life to do it, but I don't want four-wheel drive racing to die. I don't want diesel racing to die, and I think the being selfish with the information is really what deters a lot of people from our sport, and it's just not good. Just nobody benefits if the sport doesn't grow. So I'm not an expert on this stuff. I am still learning every day, but everything that I'm telling you guys is stuff that we have learned from trial and error. The reason I'm telling you that you're going to try every single hole in that 4-link bracket is because I have done it. JP has done it. We have done it together. We spent an entire winter just playing with 4-links and mathematical equations and calculating shocks and springs, and we really put in the time to figure a lot of this stuff out. And for a lot of people, they would have given up. So I don't want anybody to give up. This hobby is a lot of commitment, and I want to try to make it enjoyable for all you guys. So giveaway time. So first off, I want to say how impressed I am with how good these guesses were. Aside from 2 little outliers that really weren't even that far off themselves, all of you guys guessed within 200 pounds of what this thing weighs, which I think is really impressive considering I've never really even done a in-depth walk-around video explaining what all this truck is to you guys. So you guys that guessed, man, you guys are in the know. I did not in the last video say if I was gonna give away for over or under or what the rules were, so I'm gonna give away the closest overweight and the closest underweight. So there's actually 3 people getting stuff because 2 of you guys guessed the same weight. And I apologize if I butcher any of these names. John Milhone, I believe it is, or Millen, you guessed 47.95. The actual weight of this truck is 47.59. I scaled it right before I took it to the racetrack the last time. I was going to do a video actually showing you guys me weighing the truck, but the transfer case is out of it right now and the drive shafts, and I was going to weigh all that stuff individually, but I wanted it to be a legit number. There's too many variables with the fluids and all that stuff, so I have a picture I'll throw in the video here so you guys have proof that it was 47.59 when we took it out the very last time. So John, you won the over, and then the two people that won the under is 4710, you guys both guessed, and one was KB Diesel Shop, and the other one is, I think this is right, Bree Threezy. Guys, shoot me an email at info@getloganbuilt.com and give me your guys' address and what size shirts you wear, stuff like that, and I will get all three of you guys a swag pack on the way. So, like always, guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I really hope you guys find this one useful. You guys that are serious about racing, that have 4 links, I hope this really helps you guys out, and can't wait to see what you guys do with this info. Thanks, guys. Catch you on the next one.